couple of what seemingly are contradictory stories on the front page of my paper, or splashed on our online service today at the Australian. Some problems with the procurement and design, it appears, of the Tiger aircraft, some design flaws there, and an implication, I think, that yet again another procurement program's gone off the rails, and a lot of our audience will be tearing their hair out thinking submarines, JSFs. Yet, in the same breath, my colleague Ben Packham says we're declaring operational capability, and we've got the JSF flying operationally now, 20 platforms, I think, working. So what are we making of all this? I think Australians are starting to shrug their shoulders and think defence is a bottomless pit for wasting money. Is a simple solution. I've thrown a lot at you, but should we just be buying straight off the shelf from the Americans, with whom we're going to be fighting as coalition partners?
Yeah, look, that's an attractive proposition on one level, but it's always so complicated. Democracy's messy, and defence bureaucracy would like to streamline processes and likes to map out things for 10 years and have a clear plan how they're going to spend their money and how they're going to procure a certain kit. But the bottom line is that circumstances change, politicians have a say, and certainly with the helicopter decision, much like many other decisions in the past, our elected representatives have the final say, and sometimes they don't agree with the bean counters and the bureaucrats who are offering the advice, and they come up with an option that they think is going to work for them politically, and that in the end doesn't necessarily work out all that well for the nation. And the Eurocopter helicopters, people are really trying to make that work. People are bending over backwards to try and make that work. But it's proven problematic for a couple of reasons. One of which is that, as you suggest, there are some incompatibilities with some of the systems. And we've got some hard questions to ask ourselves here about where we anticipate we're going to be going in the future. And as you suggest, the Five Eyes partners is really the principal ones we're mostly focused on, in part because they're the ones that we want to benchmark ourselves against, but also in our neighbourhood, the neighbours in Southeast Asia and the Pacific all expect us to be up at that level too. Yeah. And so there's a real importance there. Now, so the helicopter one is tricky because they're kind of working, but not as well as they could, and they've cost a bomb. They've cost a fortune. Now, the Joint Strike Fighter also has cost a fortune, but it's a pretty flash piece of kit. It's a node in a network. It's supposed to be transformative about the way business operates, but it's short range. It works if you're in Israel, right? Yeah. And you're only wanting to strike across to one of your neighbouring countries. But when you're Australia and you've got to transit not only the continent, but then the so-called air-sea gap, it's like the limitations are quite striking.
The range limitation is a real issue, isn't it?
Huge.
But do you think the hypersonic missile program that was announced in that 1 July package might help us with that? It can hit harder further from home? Do you think it'll do that? Or
it's a partial compensator.
It's offsets the liability. Yeah. It's very vulnerable when it's tanking, though, isn't it? Tanking on your way to and from a sortie is pretty dangerous.
The tankers aren't stealthy.
No.
And if you have to, just to get out to Christmas Island, let alone somewhere else, you've got a multiple refuel on the way. So you've got to stack up tankers to pre-position for the refuels. Well, they're sitting ducks. They jump out at you.
Absolutely.
So there's a real challenge here for us to think about, and we're going to put a $100+ million aircraft with a very highly expensively trained pilot in that seat who's going to be exposed simply by being in the space where the big shiny Boeing jet, the tanker is, or the Airbus, sorry, in that case, is located.
Absolutely.
It's problematic.
Is it the right platform or the wrong platform then? If we had our time over again.
Well, the problem is, it's a wicked problem because we didn't have many other options. No. Ideally, we would have gone for the F-22
Raptor.
The Raptor, which was a superior aircraft and that is still being updated, but they're not manufacturing it anymore. And Congress dictated that it wasn't going to be sold to foreigners. Indeed. So it wasn't going to Japan, wasn't going to the Brits, wasn't coming to us. So we're stuck with the only viable, Five Eyes compatible platform, the JSF. So this is the conundrum. We want to go Five Eyes, we go JSF, and it's got huge limitations. Then we go outside of the Five Eyes with the Eurocopter helicopters. and they've got all sorts of problems too. But interestingly enough, there's a really important issue here about defence industry, and I think this is worth noting. There's a historian, Andrew Ross, wrote Armed and Ready, a book about the development, remember, in the 1930s, the industrial development of the 1930s. At the time, people poo-pooed it, thought it was a waste of time, waste of money, but in hindsight, of course, he actually set us up for a modicum of success. OK, the Wirraway, the Bren gun carriers weren't brilliant, but they were better than not having anything. And so I think there's a limitation to the parallels from the 1930s.
Yes.
I don't want to overplay that at all, because it gets you into murky territory. But there is something about us being prepared to invest in defence industry in a way that will actually give us options. And I think that's important. It's expensive, and I'm not saying we've made all the right decisions by any stretch of the imagination.
But not a bad investment, given that we're now recommitting to supply chain security at home and Australian jobs. So
and adding to resilience too.
And resilience. Last question, and I'll give you plenty of scope. Linda Reynolds inherited the submarine program and is taking a belting over that. But explain to viewers, because everyone thinks there's a panacea. We don't have the infrastructure for a nuclear submarine. People who are talking Los Angeles class are delusional, simple as that, and we can't walk away from this. How do we make it work from here?
Well, we're in a bit of a bind.
Are we?
We're not in 2014 when we could have perhaps got with the Japanese one off and bought one that could have been here by now. We don't have that option now. We're stuck with this option. We have to make this one work. But I think what we also need to bear in mind is that we have 6 superior Collins-class submarines. Now, they're getting old, but they are being refurbished, and that they're still world-class. So we have to make this deal with the French work. I don't think there's a viable alternative realistically.
That's my assessment too.
And you point out the limitations with the nuclear option. One of the key factors in going down this French path was that the United States, Australia was not in a position to take from the United States a system that we would then be completely beholden to the Americans for maintenance and for operational usage of.
Correct.
Should there be a situation where we want to do something without their imprimatur. And there's a swag of scenarios where that's actually conceivable.
Gotcha. So while the Collins is out of the water, which its time of life maintenance, as you know, is a comprehensive program, is it conceivable that they can be reconfigured to operate as motherships for unmanned vehicles or underwater remotely operated vehicles? Is that an option also?
It definitely is an option. It's an expensive one,
go with
but it's an important one. There's some work you need to do internally to the Collins to make that happen. But the bottom line is that the unattended sensors, aerial sensors, surface and subsurface vehicles are actually the way of the future. Now, they're not going to replace the submarine entirely, because underwater there's limitations with range and communications. And there's significant challenges that from my reading of the tea leaves, are enduring. They're just the physics of it make it limit the feasibility of doing something autonomously in a long distance remote way. So a mothership is still critical. A human operated system like a Collins or the new the Barracuda replacement will need to be the key node, much like with the F-35 in the sky, where you'll potentially have loyal wingman type aircraft that will operate alongside as a dummy, as a reinforcement, as a flexible option. Underwater, we need to be looking down that path. I'm hoping that we're going to see the Navy invest much more in that space. They do seem to be catching on to the need to work in this unattended sensor space.